Yeah, same here. Awesome. So yeah, I'll get kind of right to it. So what will happen is I'll have my first part of my episode is going to be about the history of curling, and then the last part will be the this interview and everything. So, kind of just straight to it. The first question: what got you guys involved in making the podcast Inside Curling?
Go ahead, Warren. Shoot.
Well, COVID. So we had been working on another project, and I was doing some contract work with the USA Curling, and Kevin was working with NBC, so we were running into each other. And when COVID hit, that project kind of came to a halt. And another associate of ours, Jim Jerome, and I worked together for years. And he had a podcast. We started talking about it one day, and I said, "Well, maybe we should do a podcast. We have nothing else to do." So I got a hold of Kevin, and we started the podcast 5 years ago.
And so, what's it been like? The response to it, and kind of putting a podcast together over the past 5 years.
I think the response has been pretty good.
Yeah.
We're with Acast now. We were with until the purchase of Grand Slams, of course. We were with Sportsnet for at least 2 or 3 years, Warren, I think.
Yeah.
And went really, really well. And then Nick and the curling group buying the Grand Slams. So then we moved over to Acast, which was a really good. It turns out to be a really good move. So that's where we're at. But it's been solid. Yeah, the numbers are great. So it's been a lot of fun.
So kind of looking at the Brier right now, you're watching the Brier from kind of the outside. What's that like? Like you've spent so much time competing in curling and being in the Brier, and now you're watching it. Do you kind of feel that urge to be out there again and feeling that competition and the high of competition?
I certainly don't. No, it's been 11 years now for me. I haven't played since 2014, so it's a long time. But I do, of course, keep an eye on everything curling because Karek, our oldest, plays with Cooey. So, this is his. I shouldn't put a number into his mouth, but I think this is his 10th Brier. I think. So Sean and I always pay real close attention to what's going on in the curling world, and this week is certainly one of them.
Kevin and I come from different eras. So the era I was in was before his. And I was a player, but I also became involved in initially the teaching aspect of the sport and then in the organizing end of it. So I worked in the organization end of Briers for 30 years. So I'm accustomed to sitting and watching. And it's funny Kevin says that, but I did for a few years because I retired from playing early because of my involvements with the sport. I did miss not playing. But by the time I was into my 40s, I lost that desire to be out there.
Just kind of related to that, we see the Brier and we see everything that goes on, but what goes on behind the scenes? You're talking about how you're kind of working on the support or the administration part of it. Is there a lot that goes on to kind of put on a Brier?
There's a huge amount. We had some huge success back in the period of probably 1997 to roughly 2015. And we did, I think, eight Briers in NHL buildings. So that was Edmonton, Calgary, and Winnipeg, and of course the big building in Saskatoon. So there's a huge amount of organization. It's changed a lot since I left it, which is now 10 years, as to how they're doing things. But back in my time, I was directing the operation of the event, and I had about 12 people that worked for me on not just the Brier, but the Scotties and the World Men's or Women's in Canada and 2 other events. But it took a dozen people to keep all that stuff going, and very busy, very busy.
And in regards to the Brier, why do Canadians latch on to curling so much? I mean, it's more than just the fact that it's played on ice like hockey. It really seems to be a huge passion for us. It wasn't a sport that we invented, but we've absolutely adopted it as our own. So where do you think that passion comes from for curling?
Well, there's a lot of curling clubs in Canada, around 1,300 clubs, tons of curlers, over 1 million curlers. So it really, I think, started as a rural sport in the country, and every little town still has a curling club, but always has had a curling club. So you grow up with your mom and dad playing, your grandma and grandpa playing, so you played, and that's kind of how the feeling of it has always been, I guess. Going now in the cities, though, the curling has grown a lot. Internationally is growing like crazy. So the future of curling is incredibly bright, especially worldwide, and it's kind of Canada's job to sort of make sure we don't lose touch with the grassroots of curling, and make sure we stay tight to that.
It's very much part of our history and our fabric of the country. It was brought to Canada by the Scottish soldiers back in 1600 on the St. Charles River by Quebec City, and it grew and prospered in the West because as the sport came west, in every community in Western Canada, there was a hockey rink and a curling club, and the curling club primarily became the hub of the social activities. And so that's why it really grew and flourished in Western Canada. And we claim hockey as the sport of Canada, but if you look through history, it's probably more so curling than Canada because it really grew with the history and fabric of the country, particularly in Western Canada.
And that was out front of the Hotel Frontenac, where the first curling was. It was General Wolfe. They melted cannonballs, and then they played. And there was actually in the basement, if you go to Hotel Frontenac, and between floors 2A and 3A, it's kind of a weird situation as far as floors go. There's actually a picture of the one sheet curling club that was in the basement of the Hotel Frontenac back in the day. Now it's kind of a long, skinny lounge, but it used to be a one sheet club.
Those cannonballs, I was in Montreal in September for the World Curling Federation conference, and the Royal Montreal Curling Club is the oldest curling club in Canada. It's right in downtown Montreal, and we were there, and there was a bunch of irons. Those reshaped cannonballs are still there in that building. So that's how far back that history goes.
And for the two of you, what is it like to be part of that history, to be part of Canada's curling history, and to have played, a significant part in building that?
Well, hopefully not done doing it. It hasn't been that long since we played, but certainly trying to continue to grow the game and bring it to the kids. That's the most important part. Bring it to the youth and being involved with young person or young people's events. I think that's a really important part of it.
From my very early involvements with the sport of curling, I always wanted better things for curling. I was very involved with football, and it was so well organized, and curling wasn't. And I always felt that curling was underappreciated, underassumed, and always wanted it to be bigger and better. And so I more or less set out from being a player fairly early in my life, striving to do that, to try and work very hard in getting it into the Olympics as a part of that whole operation. The big Briers and making the big events. Constantly wanted it to be bigger and better, and still do like Kevin. We both do today. That's why we're still doing the things we're doing. We want it to be bigger and better. So it's just been burnt in me.
Now you've both kind of had success at the Brier. What is that like to be able to accomplish that at one of the most important sporting events in Canada?
I think the whole that entire landscape has sort of changed. When I was started, just starting to play the game in the late '80s, early '90s, the Brier was kind of it, like as a championship goes. There wasn't really a tour. There were a few car spiels, like you'd have a bond spiel where the first prize were cars, but there was nothing really organized. It was just sort of a mishmash of events that went till New Year's, and then after New Year's, it was all about the playdowns, starting at the club to the zones to the regionals to the provincials to the Brier to the Worlds. It took a half a year to do that, but starting in the early 2000s, the Grand Slams became online, and so things changed as far as where everybody put their, put the importance, as well as the Olympics, of course. So it's all of a sudden you had sort of your three directions. You wanted to get to the World Championships and win. Yes. You wanted to get to the Grand Slams, play the Players Championship and win. Yes. Olympic trials to the Olympics. Yes. So the sport became sort of three-pronged, which was, I think, a big improvement to the game, rather than sort of everybody going down one path to the Brier, which is, of course, happening this week.
Yeah, in my era, certainly the Brier was the pinnacle of the sport, without question. Like Kevin, I grew up in Edmonton, but it was a very different time, and there were so many people participated in trying to get to the Brier at that point in time, because, like he says, that was it. That was the pinnacle of sport in Canada, and annually that's what you worked towards. And once you lost in the playdowns going to the Brier, there wasn't much left of your curling season, which today, to some degree, that's still there, that period of time from the middle of February till the end of the season is not as full as it should be for the top players, but it was the pinnacle. And contrary to today, I was looking today, the turnover of people that represented, particularly Alberta, where we are from, in the Brier during the period of time that I was involved as a player from probably 1960 until 1985. There was a huge number of teams, different skips that went to the Brier. But today, if you look back in the last probably 20 years, it's probably 4 or 5 people. So was very different. It was more available to all, and then to reach that pinnacle of getting to the Brier was like it was hard to even initially grab a hold of. We've made it, because you'd work so hard to get there. So to a curler in my time, it was the end all be all. Like today, as Kevin suggests, there's more than just one apple on a tree. It's one of them, but it's still it's to represent Canada at the world level, and there's a huge amount of prestige and gratitude to being able to do that.
Kind of related to what you just mentioned there, you both come from different eras, so you'll probably have different answers to this question. But how have you seen the game change from when you were playing and hit world championships and the Brier to how it is now?
Mhm. Oh boy, huge, huge. Because of the skill level has improved so drastically. Back in my day, it was the early days of the slide delivery. So people were sliding all different types of materials. They had all different types of deliveries, from tucks and partial tucks, and not really understanding a lot about the skill itself as to how you had to be successful in delivering stone. Whereas today, they're more or less out of a mold for the most part. So it was certainly the accuracy and the accomplishment in the sport wasn't near the point it is today. So it was more wide open from that point of view. The strategy has changed dramatically. It changed during my era. From when I first started playing the game was just the beginning of what they call the takeout era, because prior to that time, people couldn't throw the rock well enough to play many takeouts or throwing it from the hack. And then we went in kind of just after I kind of quit playing competitively, to the fact of the deliveries and everything had perfected to the point that takeouts, they were able to take out anything, everywhere, anytime they wanted to. And so there was no scoring. And then the ice became very straight because of corn brooms being eliminated and brushes coming in. So it's been through this constant change. But the huge difference from when I played to now is the strategy and how you play the game is completely, totally different.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say ice conditions probably have sparked the biggest change. I remember playing Ed Wernick, the wrench, in a final of the Flexicoil event. I think it's still one of the biggest cash deals ever, 60,000 first. And I remember that ice being very swingy and really good. I just, in my mind. Anyway, we had back when Carrick and Ben Hebert were downstairs at our place watching the tape, VHS tape of this game. And so I went down and just sat with them for a bit. We were taking edge of 4 for the button. And I remembered that being great swingy ice. That's only 2 feet of curl. Well, now at this Brier, they're taking edge of 12 foot. So they've got 6 feet of curl. And that's kind of the difference between, that would have been in 1996 against Wernick in that final, to today. That's the kind of difference we're talking about in 25 years is, or 30 years, is incredible amount of difference in curl, which means you're going to throw the rock different. So you have to train different, and your sweepers have to sweep different. And so but I think because of the amount of curl and the change of the rules, you've seen a complete change in the sweeping, the release, and the training as to how to do it because of that.
Yeah, there's a whole story there on the changing conditions. So back in my time, ice making was pretty crude. The rocks were pretty crude. And as a result, there was a lot of inconsistency. And because of frost and broom corn on the ice, there was lots of curl with the rocks that we used at that point in time. But we hit it into the 80s and corn brooms disappeared. Brushes became the norm. And there was also fear at that point in time with losing the ice because it had happened in the 70s and 60s. So they would freeze it very hard. So there wasn't much there for the rocks, the running edge of stone to bite into during that period of time. So everything became, as Kevin says, very straight, straight, straight. And then around the early 90s, maybe late 80s, it was discovered that using sandpaper on the running edge of the stone, which to some people always thought was taboo, could in fact create probably as much curl as you want. And today that's a common practice. They probably do it like the Brier here. They'll probably do it at least once during that event when the curl starts to diminish a bit. And they can manner in how they control sandpapering the edges. They can make the rug pretty much curl, I think, Kevin, as much as they want, can't they? Or as little as they want. They can control it.
Yeah, I think the 93 Brier was the first time where sandpaper was really shown. It was Shorty Jenkins kind of sanded a few rocks and without the ice maker that was actually the head ice maker knowing, and it was a shit show. But it actually showed that it was possible, but it was a disaster. And that was in 93. I think it was Ottawa, I think, but whatever 93 was. And then it kind of became kind of normal after that by about, 96 and 6 in in Kamloops was very straight. In 97, we started to get some curl. That was in Calgary. So it took a while, but by the end of the 90s, most of the events had decent amount of curl, but it took probably 10 years from sort of being invented to being kind of normal.
And so, Kevin, I got a question that you've probably been asked 100 times, but what was it like to win gold on Canadian ice at the Olympics in 2010?
Well, incredible. So loud. Oh, my God. That night, we were the 13th gold medal for Canada, which tied us with Russia as for the most gold medals in Olympic Games. And there's still one more game to go, of course, the next day, where Sidney Crosby made the golden goal, which gave it the 14th, which broke the record. But that night, that was a Saturday night, and there had to have been 250,000 people partying downtown Vancouver that night. We were the third gold of the game, of the day, but the last one of the day. And oh, man, was it crazy. So, yeah, it was a chance of a lifetime, to be honest with you. There's nothing more I can say than that. It was a blast, incredible, but to be on home soil, just a dream come true, definitely.
Absolutely. And then with your podcast, somebody coming in, say they don't know anything about it, what can they expect listening to Inside Curling?
Well, we offer a show that's maybe a little different than a lot of podcasts, but it's sort of an all-encompassing show. So we have a news segment in it where we kind of bring people up to date what's happened in the curling world. We have an email portion where we will discuss an email that listeners send us, or we will pull something off of social media that seems to be a hot topic, and we'll talk about that. And then we do an interview with usually a top curler or somebody significant in the sport, and conclude it with a segment that Kevin and I alternate back and forth on. It's sort of a historic moment from the sport of curling. So that's the way most of our shows are structured. But we do some specialty shows from the Brier this week and from the Scotties 2 weeks ago, et cetera, where we just focus on those events for about 20 minutes. And we also do some specific interview shows where it's just an interview. So that's the variety we have.
And being run by Jimmy Drome, Jungle Jim is a character, and so he tries to keep our bus out of the ditch, but we go in the ditch quite often. So he definitely puts a light side to the podcast. There's no question about that.
And then the last question, just where can people listen to it? When do you typically release? And yeah.
It's called Inside Curling, and anywhere that you can get your podcasts. It usually goes out on a Wednesday or Thursday morning, our weekly show. But of course, we do during big events like the Brier, the Grand Slam, Scotties, Worlds, Olympics, Olympic trials. We'll do a Friday, Saturday show as well, or Thursday, Friday, depends on when the finals are and so on. But generally on Wednesday morning or Thursday morning, the main show goes out every week on Inside Curling. And our email, if people want to email, you can get on the show at insidecurling@gmail.com.